Hello, welcome to my channel. Today I wanted to share with you the story of the books that I have written prior to Law of Assumption. The reason being is I just received my latest royalty statement, which I have done nothing for in these past few years, and it was the highest amount I have ever received for the books that I've written. And I have done nothing for it except one thing, using the law of assumption, and I wanted to share that with you today so that you can use that one thing to create whatever it is you want to see more of in your reality. So that's what we're doing today. Stick around. My name is Hedley, and the purpose of this channel is to deepen your understanding of the amazing teachings of law of assumption, but more importantly, to help you apply these teachings to your life, because it is in the application that you will see the most benefits. If you'd like support, I do offer coaching, law of assumption coaching. You will find those details in the box below this video. I also have a free 21-day set yourself up with the ultimate self-concept course, which is the ultimate story. You'll find those details in the box below, or at my website, youaretheone.com.au, but let's get into it. Okay, so today I wanted to do something a little bit different, and that is I wanted to share the story of the books that I have written. These are all the books, actually these are just some of them. I've actually written others that are not in hard form and some that haven't been published, but these are the ones that have been published. The reason that I wanted to share this story is because I've never spoken directly about my books. I know you've heard me refer to my books in my video because this is part of my life. But the reason that I was inspired to share this video is because the day before yesterday, I received my royalty statement for my books, which I do every quarter. And I never really take notice of them because they're always of such a small amount. But one of the things that I did coming into the law of assumption was, even though I was done with being a full-time author, I had already written so many books that it seemed like a waste to just kind of throw that career away. So I worked on the story, revising the story of my career as a writer, and revising in particular the royalty statements, because the statement would come in and I'd look at these tiny amounts and just be like, oh my God, all of those years and all of that work for these tiny little amounts. And I thought, well, hey, I know law of assumption now, so I'm going to change that. So the day before yesterday, I received my latest royalty statement, and it was the most that I have ever received in the 10 years that I was a writer. And I have not lifted a finger for that. I have done nothing for that. Now, of course, I have written the books, and a lot of work and time and effort went into the writing of the books. But since then, I have not done anything to promote my books or for that royalty statement to be what it was. But I sold the most books in the last quarter than I've ever sold in a quarter. Now, how is that possible? How is that possible? That's what this is all about. The impossible is made possible. All I did was I changed the assumption of what my royalty statements were doing, and I changed the assumptions of what my books were doing. I just did it internally. That's all I did. And I have done nothing in the last couple of years to promote these books, because I was telling a story of like, oh, I've written all these books, but you know, they're not really selling, and they're kind of, you know, they're old now and they're forgotten. And then I came into law of assumption, went, that's it. That's not a great story to be telling about something that I put my heart and soul into for so long. So I changed the story to my books are selling and my royalty statements are increasing. And that's exactly what has been happening since I changed that story. My royalty statements have been going up in these last few quarters, and the number of sales of my books have been going up in these last few quarters, and I have not done anything in reality for that to happen. You know, these are my babies, they're my creations, and I did birth them into the world. And also they do demonstrate how I was using the law of assumption without actually knowing it. Because prior to writing my first book, I was always a writer, and I was always published in magazines, and I had a column in a magazine. So I was always writing, but my columns were small, like they were about 700, 800 words. And I had the assumption that I was a columnist, that I was a journalist. So I only wrote short form, and that I didn't have the discipline or the commitment to write a book, because a book takes years and it's long form and it's a very in-depth process. And I just had the assumption that I was not a long distance writer, kind of like I was with athletics. I was a sprinter, and I was a sprinter in the pool and a sprinter on the track. I was never long distance with anything. So why would I be long distance with writing? That was the assumption I had. But then I also had this desire to be an author and to write a book. So I was like, okay, well, this is not going to work out. I have to change this thought. So I actually, without knowing law of assumption at this time, this was back in 2012, I changed the story to, okay, I'm going to write a book. I'm going to write a book and be an author. I had to show up to that. Now, this book here was my first book, Real, Raw and Original. It's the authentic approach to public speaking. Now, this book took me 3 years, and the reason it took me 3 years is because this was my first book. So I had no evidence in reality that my story of being an author could be true. So I was up against, in fact, old assumptions that I didn't have it in me to be an author, and that being an author was for other people who could last the distance and who had commitment and discipline, which were qualities that I didn't associate with myself. So I had to overcome all of these. And the thing that I always say to writers is, once you've written your first book, you never have to write it again. It's already done. And every book also gets easier because you've already done it once. But when you're setting up a new reality for yourself and you have negative assumptions working in opposition to the reality you want to have, you are in for a little bit of a battle. And that was what I experienced with this book. It felt like a battle against myself, which of course it all is. And it took me 3 years because the negative thoughts that were running as I was writing the book. So I'm writing and the thoughts are, this is shit. No one's going to read this. You're right. You're wasting your time. What are you doing with your life? You're wasting, like it just went on and on and on. Like the worst story you could possibly think. It was all running through my head as I was writing. It's very distracting, as I'm sure you can imagine. So I actually had to step away from it for 9 months because those thoughts eventually won out and I was like, yeah, I can't do this. This is not for me. But then the desire to be an author was so strong that I eventually decided to come back and finish the book. And it felt like one of the hardest things that I had done at the time, because it felt like just climbing a mountain where you couldn't see the top, because I couldn't see how this was going to be a reality. So that was the first book. Now, once I had written the first book, things just became a lot easier. I wrote this book in 3 months, I think, or 6 months. This was my second book, Finding Paris, which is also this book. It got republished by my publishers. So I self-published this book, and then I got a publishing contract and they republished it, and it has been republished multiple times, and it feels a little bit out of my hands, even though it's not. But the thing with this book is I loved writing this book. It was one of the best creative processes I've ever had, and I feel like that joy that I was in when I wrote this book has translated onto the page so that people enjoy it, and this book has continued to be my best-selling book out of all of them, still to this day. My reality was producing itself over and over and over, because I'm spending 2 years on a book and it's producing my reality. Of course, I'm not making the connection at this point. But I did make the connection with the second book after this, was After Paris, where every chapter I wrote, it would manifest into my reality to the point where I was like, well, I'm writing about my past and I'm writing about things that I don't necessarily want to experience in my reality again. So I'm going to stop writing, because it freaked me out so much. I didn't know what was happening. Every time I sat down to write a chapter, it would manifest and I would experience it within 24, 48 hours. And I'm like, I don't know what's happening here. I can't write this because I don't want to manifest it. So I ended up stopping writing. Now, that was a really big decision for me, because I had been a writer my whole life and writing was my creative outlet. So what happened after that is, because I did not have a creative outlet, I hit a very dark place in my life, very dark, where I went to the brink. Now, this is the story I have revised, so I won't go into it. Basically, I wanted to end my life. This was back in 2015. I made an attempt to do that. I've since revised it, so I won't go into the old story. But it was a very dark place, and thankfully I survived and came through that. And part of my recovery was the writing of this book. Now, I wrote this book. This was the first time I had written since stopping writing after Paris, because I'd freaked myself out with it. And this was never meant to be a book. This was just my recovery process. And once I had finished this challenge that I'd set myself, this creative challenge, I had about 80,000 words, and I was like, oh my God, this could help somebody else. It took me 30 days to write and 2 years to publish. What happened was, I had always had the assumption that I was a writer, but no one would ever want to publish my books because my books weren't good enough, which is why I self-published this one, because I was afraid, I was terrified of sending my manuscripts to a publisher, because I had the assumption that they were just going to get rejected. So why bother? So I'll just self-publish. That was my assumption. And I wanted to challenge that assumption. So I had decided with the manuscript for this book that I was not going to self-publish this book. This book would either be published by a publisher or it was not going to be published at all. So I set about for the next 3 months sending this book off to every publisher in Australia, all the major publishers. And guess what happened? It got rejected by every single publisher. It was one of the hardest 3 months I've had to go through because I had to face the reality of my assumption that I was going to be rejected show up in my reality. Remember, I don't know law of assumption at this point. So yeah, that was a really, really challenging time because my reality was just reflecting back my awful assumptions that I was holding, which was that I was not very good and that no one was going to publish my book and that any publisher would reject any manuscript I sent into them. That was what I was assuming, and that was what was being reflected back. Now, this is where it gets interesting because I also had an assumption that this was a good book. I knew I had something. So I actually rewrote a chapter, I brought a chapter out and put it at the front of the book. I then sent it off to a publisher that I hadn't realized I'd missed. And I sent the revised manuscript off to this publisher that I had missed, a very good publisher in Australia. And I got a call back that afternoon and I had a publishing contract for not only this book, but also Finding Paris within a month. But I saw my reality reflect back the new story that I was telling because I at least had the assumption that in fact this was a good book and I was determined to get it published. So I just held on to that, and then reality reorganized itself and I got a publishing contract and an advance and a second book published. It was nuts, actually. So once you've overcome a negative assumption and your reality is reflected back, you never have to go through it again. I mean, you can if you fall back into the old story, but I knew that once I had that publishing contract, I was over the hump of believing that I could never be published because I had done it and I knew it came from me. It didn't come from outside of me. And then I went on to write Meet Me in Milan, which was the follow-up to Finding Paris. That was a wonderful process in itself. But what was interesting about these 3 books, so these are the 3 books that are with my publisher. This is the book that got me the publishing contract, and this is the book that I got paid the advance for. Interestingly, this is the book that I have not yet paid the advance back. So all of the sales of this book go back to the publisher because I'm still paying off the advance. These 2 books, this book in particular, continues to be my best-selling, most successful book. It also is the most joyful one that I've written. This one is second because it's the follow-up. But once I changed the story to what my books were doing in reality, suddenly there was a change in publisher. So I am now with a new publishing house. The person who is publishing my book submitted Finding Paris for that book club. And that is what has caused my royalty statements to increase, is because the opportunity for people to find my books has increased. Now, I have done none of this. In fact, I was like, I don't even really understand what's happening. I just signed the new contract and I agreed to being in the book club, and everything was taken care of, and that has resulted in increased royalty statements. The only thing that I have done, and this is the point of this video, is when I came into Law of Assumptions, one of the first stories I changed was about my books. They hadn't been selling very well up until then. I mean, they sold when they were published and then they sort of died off. But I was like, the books are still available, so why not change the story? So I changed the story to my books are increasing in sales and my royalty statements are increasing in amounts. And that has been the case. And I have sold more books in this last year since coming into Law of Assumption than I have sold previous. And I was so amazed by that, because not just because I've spent so much time and effort writing these things, but what I'm more excited about is the fact that I did nothing. All I did was change the story. And that's what you can do too. So if something is in your past and it's sitting there, it's something that you did ages ago and nothing's happened with it, you can still change the story and you can still experience that reality showing up now. Remember, time is a concept of consciousness. Past and future do not exist other than in your imagination. Everything is happening now. So if you change a story or an assumption that you've been holding from the past about something you've done in the past, if you change that story, you can see that reality reflected back now, because you've shifted the state of consciousness, and all consciousness is happening now. So if you shift into a new state of consciousness, it has to be reflected back. Now, the one thing I want you to remember with this is there is a time component to this. So I started reworking my story on my books as soon as I came into Law of Assumption. So this is almost 2 years ago. Now I have seen an increase in my book sales and royalty statements, but it has probably taken just under 2 years. There's no rush with this. I have not been sitting around thinking about this. This is just something that I did a while ago. Every now and then I think about it. I go, oh yeah, my books are increasing, my royalty statements are increasing, and I get on with my life. I'm not crazy obsessive about it. It's just when I think about it or I see my books, because now my books are out on my bookcase so I can see them, and I just affirm whenever I'm aware of it, I just go, oh yeah, they're increasing in sales and my royalty statements are going up. That's all I do. That's literally all I do, and that's all I've done. And that's now what's happened, and it's been reflected back, and it's just amazing. So I wanted to share with you this story. Again, this story is to remind you that you can do this too. This is whatever you've got going on in your life, whatever you've done in your past that hasn't perhaps been as successful as you would like it to be. You can revise that right now. You can change the story right now. Nothing is finished, nothing's set, nothing's fixed. Everything is up for change, and everything is up for change right now, and you will see that result reflected back. You don't know how, you don't know where. I wouldn't have known how this would have all happened. I couldn't have done this myself. There's no way I could have done, there's just no way I could have done all of that myself. The law of assumption is working whether you know it or not, and it has been working in your life up to this point, whether you've known it or not. Thankfully, you know it now, so you can use it more consciously, and you can create the life and reality that you want to live from here on. So I hope that helps. Please remember, as always, you are the amazing creators of your reality. You are the superstar of your show. You are the producer, the writer, the director, and the actor in your movie. What you assume to be true will be so. So assume the best for you. Assume the best for everyone in your movie too, and you will have an amazing life. And this is my wish, my vision, and my prayer for you. Thank you so, and for me too. Thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to subscribe to my channel, I would love to have you, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Bye.